Well, welcome to another episode of Purple Insider. Matthew Coller here, along with Joe Nelson, my friend from bringmethenews.com. And the reason that you are here, Joe, is because both of us have been watching the Netflix series Quarterback. And I actually just got off the phone with a bunch of Vikings fans who I asked on Twitter to reach out to me and tell me what they thought of it, because everybody's watching, everybody's talking about it. It's kind of like the Jordan doc during the COVID year where there was literally nothing else going on. So everyone all watched the same thing, and a real range of opinions that we'll get into and talk about this thing. But I'd love to just start out with your takeaway. And the reason I wanted you on the show is because you guys have been writing about it and bringing me the news. I know that you and Jonathan Harrison have been watching it and going over it with a fine tooth comb for anything that you can make into a headline.
We
but
woke up we woke up at 2 o'clock in the morning Wednesday when it dropped on Netflix. So midnight Pacific time, right? So we got up and we were like, we got to get the jump on this. We need to get the stories because you need to get the clicks. And if you're first, you win. That's the media jackal lifestyle, right? So 2 o'clock in the morning, we hop out of bed and we are alternating episodes. He watches episode 1, I go 2, he goes 3, I go 4, so on and so forth until we consumed all 8 episodes in like a 3.5 hour, 4 hour block. And we're taking notes and writing, trying to craft some silly story out of this whole thing. But yeah, we got a heavy dose of it, and it was very hard knocksy. But the focus was just on like 3 players and their families, so it wasn't as scattered. And what I think is really intriguing about it is that you're getting the inside look at 3 premier players. Well, 2 premier players and 1 former Heisman winner, which is pretty good. I think Mariota won the Heisman, didn't he?
It's not. He was really good at football in
He was
college and
really
not so much in the NFL. But yeah, let's just talk about kind of the overarching thoughts, and then we can dive into some specifics from the show. For me, I think that covering the league, I'm not surprised by anything that was shown there, but it's nothing that even reporters would get to see it actually happening. And what I mean is, especially the rehab that Kirk Cousins goes through, all that it takes. I mean, this is one thing that every player will talk about when they get into the NFL is how much more physical rehab they have to do, how much work away from the facility that they have to do, the dedication to even understand the playbook and all those things. And I think what this did a tremendous job of, specifically with Kirk, is just sort of pulling back the curtains and saying everything that this guy does to get on the field is right here. Take a look at it. How insane is this? And so you have the immediate reaction of like, wow. I mean, even knowing generally what it took from my perspective, being able to actually see it, you understand. I think one of the things I came away with, Joe, is you understand why some quarterbacks, actually a lot of quarterbacks, don't work out in the NFL, because the price to pay poker is that. Like, that is what it takes to get on the field as an NFL player. That's the pain that you have to go through. That's the physical rehab. That's the amount of hours that you have to put into it. And it becomes an entire thing for your family, like an
Yeah.
all consuming part of your family to even be an NFL quarterback. So I think that was maybe like at the top of the list of the sort of wow factor of the show.
Yeah, that's a really good point. The family dynamic I thought was really interesting because I've seen a lot of Minnesota fans all of a sudden kind of just patting Kirk on the back for how dedicated he is to dad life, that Midwestern dad vibe. And once the game's over, the pads are off, or even when the pads are on in some of the instances in the show, hey Cooper here, hey Turner, is it Turner and Cooper? Is that what they are? No, that's Cooper and can't remember his kids' names, but hey Cooper, let's get a chicken nugget, 5 strawberries, good moderation, that stuff was really cool. But then they looked at Patrick Mahomes and how much flair and how boisterous he was both on and off the field, yelling at the dogs and everything. He's just a more intense human than Kirk is. So the Minnesota fans are like, "Oh wow, I really like this Kirk vibe. It's really appealing to me because we love that here in Minnesota." And then we're kind of put off by the Patrick Mahomes cocky vibe, right? But the difference is Kirk's 34 going on 35. He's got 2 kids and a wife, and he's been there and done that, a decade longer almost than Patrick Mahomes has. So you got to see both sides on and off the field. I was just really surprised about literally everything. I had no idea that Kirk was hooking up electrodes to his head and watching something in his car after a long day at TCO Performance Center and trying to determine if he was focused or not when the video goes in and out of focus on his phone. I mean, it's just ridiculous how long those days are. And then to still have the patience as a parent, I know, parent of two young kids, I know, the patience to sit down, read a book, sing the song, and then get your minute of alone time. That's not for the weak. I mean, that's crazy, and it explains why a lot of guys do flame out, no matter how athletic or strong their arms are.
So I remember I wrote a story when Kirk first came to Minnesota where I interviewed a quarterback coach that he had worked with on some throwing technique when he was in Washington. And what he did when he was in Washington as a backup, because he wasn't getting a whole lot of reps with the first, it might not even be the second team, because I think Rex Grossman was there as well when he first started. And so he wasn't getting a lot of opportunity to even really throw the football in practice. And so he would fly this coach in and they would work with like after practice together to just try to subtly and slowly improve his throwing technique. And he would do that all the time. And I think that there was also a story, I can't remember, maybe Bleacher Report wrote it, about how he had an office in Washington specifically kind of for him so he could go in there and study and kind of have his own space to him. I think what you really see is a guy who, when you look at his NFL combine scores, incredibly unimpressive as an athlete in comparison to like the Cam Newtons of the world and the Michael Vicks of the world, or the Josh Allens. I mean, he doesn't have the height, the speed, whatever. So he understood from really day one of being in the NFL, and probably even when he was in college as well, because he was not a highly recruited athlete coming out of high school, that
Yep.
the only way he was going to make it was just by doing things that other people were not willing to do. And, it's sort of like the real magic with him is what happens behind the scenes, the stuff that nobody sees, and how much he puts into it. And those are such great examples. I mean, it looks a little funny. Someone used the prison Mike meme of him with the electrode thing on his head. And
Yeah.
there is some of me that says, like, does this really work or really do anything? But
No.
I think that the sheer amount of information and focus that it requires to memorize just all of the plays, and not just your own assignment, which a wide receiver or a tight end or something might have to know. It's every single person's assignment, where they have to be. And I don't know that any show has ever done a better job at taking us behind the scenes of what it takes to actually just stand out there on the field.
Yeah. Well, the photographic memory thing is well, it's not that these guys have photographic memories like McVay, right? It's like these guys are very close to it, and it takes intense studying where you sit there and look at it. If somebody offered you $35 million to do that for, I don't know, what, 8, 9 straight months, it's like you watch what he's doing in that, and yeah, you take it and you do it, but the commitment, and that must be just a miserable 10 months outside of game days. I mean, that's quite the commitment. But what I thought really stood out, when you talk about the physical attributes and being lowly recruited, and the only way he can stay in the game is with this cerebral nature and putting in the work with his mind, really just having enough arm talent and whatnot to get the job done. But how does a guy, and this is where I think those electrodes and neuro focus thing really come into play here, maybe, is when a guy in a game against Buffalo gets absolutely destroyed and his ribs are on the verge of cracking in half on both sides, and you hear him groaning in pain. But to still, in those moments, stand in there and make some of the throws he made to Justin Jefferson in that game. Remember, late, there was that deep throw to the sideline that set up the eventual major talking point from the show, which was the QB sneak mistake that he made, and Kevin O'Connell was all over him. But to make those throws when you're in that kind of pain, in that kind of pressure, unbelievable. Like, you can that's just arm talent and guts. That's the stuff that I don't think anybody ever thought Kirk Cousins necessarily had. It's like we see him playing 16, 17 games, whatever the length of the regular season is, and we say, okay, well, that's because he's not a scrambling quarterback. He's avoiding the big hits. He's getting rid of the ball. He's protecting himself. That's not always the case. And I think this was an eye opener for me anyway, to say just how tough he is, especially when you're in your mid 30s and things do take longer to heal. It's really remarkable, and he deserves a standing applause, a standing ovation for that kind of performance.
Yeah, tell me about it. This is sort of devolves into the hey, remember those people on the internet who said they could gain 5 yards in the
Oh,
NFL? I just want to watch Kirk
yeah.
take a hit there, and he spends the entire year preparing his body for those hits.
Yeah, yeah,
The other day, I was doing something moving, and we'll get eventually we'll have a nicer background here someday when I finally get moved. But I just leaned over and pulled something in my back and
yeah.
it took like 4 days to heal. Like, yeah, Kirk and I are almost the same age, and so
Yes.
that's what
Try
he's
Deron
going
Payne
through in
try
comparison.
Deron Payne coming at you and knocking you on your backside, and you make a throw and complete it. And I thought that was a really cool moment to show. Deron Payne hits Kirk Cousins, and he's on his back. Oh, did we get the first down? And then moments before that, Deron Payne hits him and taps him, and he's like, "You'll be all right." It's like, this is not fair. This is a little Kirk versus Big Deron, and you just got leveled, but you won the play. I mean, it's amazing what these guys can accomplish.
I think this does shine a light on sort of the right and wrong criticisms of Kirk Cousins, which is something that over the last, I don't know, 5+ years or whatever, that we've talked about a lot on this show. It's like if, and this sort of gets into what I was talking with Vikings fans about is like I think that you can say that he can't get them over the top by himself, that even with good teams that they've had, it's just not enough. You can point to the contract, you can point to the lack of athleticism and a lack of playmaking. And I think there's even something to be said through this documentary of what you talked about with Patrick Mahomes. And while some people may be put off by the cockiness of Patrick Mahomes, there's also the element of let's talk about all the greatest athletes to ever play. And they
Yeah,
all kind of have that next level gene of competitiveness to the level of being a psycho where he says, like, I just black out sometimes out there and start just doing stuff. I don't even know what's going on. And I think
right.
that there is a part of him where when we're talking about that check down on 4th and 8 and he's saying like, well, Jefferson is double teamed and we're all going, Kirk, that's a
Yeah,
you should really just throw that to him anyway. So there's like parts that are worth criticizing, and then there's others that are not. Like his toughness, his ability to lead an offense, his professionalism, and I think what this also showed, Joe, was the care. Like the ride home is the scene that I think a lot of people will take home with them for a long time because you can just sense the agony that he was going through because he really felt like that was his one big shot to make this happen, and to not have it happen, you could really feel that it was crushing his soul.
yeah. I'm at a point in my life where it's actually really starting to bother me when I go on Twitter, which is a hellscape, of course. Um, but anywhere, when I sit here and see people justifying their not even criticisms, but a-holism towards athletes because they make a lot of money, it's like, I, mental health matters, and $35 million can buy you a lot of therapists, but your therapist might be $100 a session, right? And that might be the best therapist in the world for you. These guys, it's not, I mean, they can't take that much. You cannot hammer people the way we've been hammering people in this world for ages. It comes with the territory is such a lame excuse, just put yourself in somebody else's shoes for once in your life and try to imagine what it would be like to sit down at dinner with your kid or your wife or your friends and have them ask about how much the world despises you because you didn't throw for a first down. I get it. It's what this whole industry's made of, right? It's just this jackassism that exists in media, but it doesn't have to be. We can all be kind. Like, I really do feel for these guys. We see it all the time. I'll never forget it. A few years ago, I wrote a story about Adrian Payne, the former Timberwolf, right? And it was just a mockery, and I feel guilty about it to this day. But somebody created a video of lowlights. Adrian Payne was a great Michigan State player, but he wasn't a good NBA player. He great basketball player. He made it to the highest level. Well, then Adrian Payne dies a few years later, and all you see is all these wonderful stories about how he's helping kids with cancer away from the court and everything. His whole NBA career was just filled with people online mocking him. And I was a part of that for that brief moment. And I feel bad about that. So like when you actually sit back and think about what you're saying about Kirk Cousins, and then you get an opportunity to see how great of a guy he is, at least in these snippets where these videos are uncensored around him all the time. Yes, he did say that he had the opportunity to approve all of the content that went out in this show. So maybe there's some uglier moments that didn't get out there. I don't know, but you got to think twice about it. Culture has to change. That's my soapbox, I guess. But yeah, I really feel for him because he just seems like such a legit, genuinely nice guy.
I think what one of the biggest takeaways from the fans I talked to was humanizing Kirk Cousins for them in ways that, I mean, if you are reading every single thing that's ever been written about Kirk, you would probably get a good understanding of this stuff. But I'm not sure
Yeah, right.
anyone could possibly do that. But I think you can live in both worlds, where you can live in a world where it's very fair to look at the Kirk Cousins era and say this was not what it was expected to be. To have one playoff win, it was expected to be more than that. You can look at times throughout his career here where he's been kind of tone deaf in the way that he acted,
Sure.
and his some of his public comments and things like that that would be off-putting to fans and deserving of criticism. That's why I'm talking about, like, in the realm of what we should and should not criticize about Kirk Cousins. And it is also worth bringing up exactly what you said, that throughout a season, well, they first of all, they didn't pick 2021, they picked 2022. So it was a lot easier to make Kirk look like he was having an okay time and a fun time with this team and the locker room and everything else. I would love to see the NFL films behind the scenes for 2021. And I also think that you have to understand that the job of this thing was to show certain parts of playing quarterback. But if it's inside the locker room all the time, if it was inside the coach's room all the time, there's a lot of drama and there's a lot of things that happen, a lot of tense moments. I mean, I would have loved to have seen the behind the scenes on their last practice before week one, I think they threw 5 interceptions or something, and there was clearly
Oh,
some dissent going on at training camp. So a lot of, like, the negative parts of what happens throughout a season and the tension and frustration and people not getting along and drama is washed out of this, and you just have to understand that. That's not a criticism. It's just like the Jordan documentary. It's done by Jordan. You have to understand what we're trying to do here.
yeah.
But I want to talk about Kevin O'Connell in this, because I think that obviously Kirk Cousins, the family man, the tough guy, the, like, does anything, and everything to be on the field guy, is the biggest winner of the whole thing. I mean, we already knew all this about Mahomes. We kind of already knew all this about Mariota, but
Yeah.
second biggest winner, I think, is Kevin O'Connell. And it was very interesting to get even just a little window into his relationship with Kirk Cousins.
What I thought was really, really prudent about his presence in the episodes was he comes across as the guy who would be a player's coach, but you don't want to disappoint him. Like, he's very fair, but he's very stern, but he does it in a very polite way. Like, he's just a professional from top to bottom, head to toe. Um, the moment where he's upset with Kirk in the Buffalo game, I think that's a great example because he can separate friend from business, right? A lot of people can't do that. And that's what I think you have to do as a football coach and a leader of men. Kirk always mentions, we always saw these the post game celebrations in the locker room where Kirk's like, all right, man, you talk to him like men, but you're very serious about it. This is a business. Leslie Frazier, I always thought when he was there, he was too quiet. Brad Childress, I thought, didn't have that relationship ability. Mike Zimmer, same kind of thing. Too stern, too much of a this is football. KOC seems like he just has that perfect blend, the perfect ingredient that's going to help sustain a culture of success and happiness, but with expectations being met. Like, nobody's going to walk over him because they know that if they abuse that relationship, he's not going to put up with it.
Yeah, I think that's true. And one of the questions that I had about O'Connell early on, especially when last year they were making a big deal of him not yelling during training camp, of which, let me tell you, when Mike Zimmer was coaching, it was a little bit louder than that, with
Real quick
his
point.
voice.
You know who the loudest of all time is in my experience? Eric Bieniemy. Oh my God! When he was the running backs coach of the Vikings, when Adrian was young, I'll never forget. Toby Gerhart must have nightmares about the amount of yelling sessions he had. And we're not talking yelling sessions. We're talking like, hey, this is your father straight from hell. He just got home from the bar and he's going to abuse you verbally. This is terrifying stuff. But I digress. Go on.
No, and I think actually what you just said is one of the reasons Bieniemy hasn't gotten a head coaching job, along with other reasons. But some of that, I think that he's even rubbed Mahomes the wrong way at times, and there's been a little bit of conflict between those two, which I think has played into it for why he hasn't gotten more attention despite his accomplishments. But Phil Rauscher, their offensive line coach from 2 years ago, he was the guy that you could hear all the way outside of the stadium if you were there for practice. But one of my questions was just is he going to be able to turn it on when he needs to turn it on? Because, like you said, Mr. Nice Guy is good, but you also need to be able to MF some people to make sure that everybody knows like you're serious. And I remember there's a great story about Joe Gibbs, where Joe Gibbs was the most even type of guy, and they went into halftime once down, 14 points or something, and Joe Gibbs threw a table, and they were like, oh my gosh, if this guy lost it. And I think there needs to be some of that with him as well. And also where it's like an understanding, and I think Gary Kubiak was great at this too, an understanding of what you're going through as a quarterback, but also the standard is not just excuses when you make mistakes, right? And, and the way he, I think, talked about Kirk and defended him in public is admirable as well. But much more importantly, that relationship between the two. And this goes to, again, we don't know about all those interactions. We only know the way that they're presented here. But my mind went to the next quarterback because I'm me. And of course it did. But
Yeah.
here's what I think, though. I think what you saw from the perspective of the next quarterback who comes in, what he's going to be up against with O'Connell's offense, whoever that might be, if it's a rookie, but also what he has in a person who's going to lead him. And I remember when he was getting hired, and there was a chunk of people that wanted Harbaugh, and maybe we did too for the content just a little bit. But the thing that I pushed back the most on was, don't you want the offensive coordinator who worked with McVay, who like connects with people and is a former quarterback? Because there's nothing that's going to be more important than the next quarterback. And I think you come away with even more confidence than you had after last year.
Yeah, absolutely. All of that happened with 1 year of the KOC game plan, which is pretty remarkable. And to have so many fourth quarter comebacks and come from behind victories, I mean, that's remarkable in and of itself. Now, I remember writing a story last year about how the offense was just, and this might have been just a first half issue more than a second half of the season issue, but third quarters they were disastrous for the first 5-6 games of the season. I think through week 6 they had 6 points in the third quarter, and they were lighting up teams. They were up 21-0 on the Bears, and then they find themselves down 22-21, and this kept on happening. But I think those kinds of issues might go away in year 2 because they'll just have that offense down pat a little bit more. But in terms of Kevin O'Connell, and is he the right kind of leader, and is he the nice guy, and can he find that balancing act? Where I think he did that, and maybe this is all Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, but where KOC gets some credit here is moving on from a lot of popular players. I mean, those are things that this franchise hasn't done in the past, and I think actions speak louder than words. And when you say goodbye to Adam Thielen and Dalvin Cook specifically, and then Patrick Peterson to a degree, and za'darius Smith wanted out, him to a degree as well. Eric Kendricks definitely is one of those that is a big star next to his name. When you say goodbye to those players, it sends a signal that nobody's safe, even if you're my buddy. Remember, KOC talked glowingly about Adam Thielen. Every time he talked about him, he's like, this is a good friend of mine. This is somebody that I rely on. We have a great relationship. It seems like a lifelong kind of thing, but this is a business, and it didn't get in the way of that decision, that roster move. So, I think we can probably expect the same kind of thing for Kirk Cousins going forward. Maybe they sign him to an extension. Maybe they don't. But the seeds have been planted where they now have set the precedent that nobody is safe. It doesn't matter what your contract status is or what your friendship is like, how much respect you have. It's just business. And I think he's done that.
Yeah, I think that even during last year, he did a good job, Kevin O'Connell, at the end of the season, sort of preparing people for what was going to happen, where he talked about how much those players meant to him, but there's realities of business.
Right.
And you can kind of, I mean, with them, though, you can't really put it on the GM because it's really these two. It's like the Zimmer Spielman era, the Adofo-Mensah Kevin O'Connell era, a little harder to say, more syllables. But no, I mean, it's them. It's like they're a team. They have presented themselves that way. They go to San Diego State basketball games during the NCAA tournament that way. And so being ruthless and allowing some of those players to go when I think a lot of coaches would fight for those veteran players to stay. And maybe that's why they did in part. Also, there's the ownership element of all that. But I don't want to get too far away from the Netflix show conversation because I think that communication, the ability to communicate, but also lead in somewhat of a stern way at times, but also an understanding way at times was really important. But one thing that didn't really happen, Joe, is adversity with this team last year. And I thought that, with this, of course, as you're following around along the ride, you see how Kirk dealt with the loss to the Giants and everything else.
Mhm.
But I guess the fact that they didn't play any more games after that, I wonder if it will linger, and I wonder how things will progress with Kirk Cousins this year and with Kevin O'Connell when it is a little bit different. It is a little bit beyond just the honeymoon here for both of those guys. And if there are, I think, more bumps in the road, that will be something that's really interesting to watch how he reacts because last year was mostly a magic carpet ride.
Yeah, the only real example I think we got last year of responding to adversity was the Dallas blowout, right? You get your ass kicked 40-3 on Sunday Night Football, and the whole world's laughing at you. 7 days after you have the miracle game against the Bills. Which if we're all being real, the Vikings probably should have won about 7 games last year. It was just remarkable, and that might be their fate this year, but. How they respond is yet to be determined, and we really don't have any information to base any kind of prediction off of, other than that Dallas game. Right? That was a regular season game. They had the excuse that hey, we were exhausted after that Buffalo thriller. Right? They had the excuse that hey, we were 7-1 going into that game. We had the excuse that hey, our seeds are planted in the playoffs pretty much already because we're in this division. I mean, they had a lot of things going for them in terms of excuse land. So I honestly I can't draw from anything off the top of my head that would scream, yeah, they're going to come back from that adversity against the Giants. I mean, there's literally nothing other than the Dallas game. Can you think of
Yeah.
anything? Yes.
And the way that they bounced back a few nights later against the New England Patriots was very impressive. Although they did
Painful.
give up
Yeah. Mac Jones
probably
looked
Mac Jones.
right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Mac Jones's best game ever, but it came that night. But there's not a whole lot they could do there. I guess that the part about adversity is just the defense, and the way it was handled was not good enough. Because I think that if he's learning anything from last year, we talk about that sternness, and I don't want to give him too much credit for that because I think that when a defensive coordinator continues to be insubordinate and not play the way you want him to play, you can't let him stay in charge.
Yeah.
And they did that for Ed Donatel, and it very well may have cost them because they just refused to ever blitz Daniel Jones in that playoff game. And he sat back and picked them apart, and they lost in part because of it. And I did notice that Kirk snuck in there. Well, when you only have like 50 plays, and it was like, yeah, I hear you, buddy. I know what you're saying. And you
Yeah.
know what? What was cut out of that conversation might have been a longer rant about the defense
Yeah.
between him and his wife. Because I'll tell you, if I was him, I probably would have been having that rant about the defense on my way home.
Oh yeah. Well, what do you think it was? Do you think it was the actual struggle with implementing a more aggressive defense in the course of a season, or was it Kevin O'Connell? Maybe that was the one hiccup where he was like, I just can't find it in me. I don't have the intestinal fortitude to tell this respected leader with years of experience and successful defenses, Ed Donatel, that he needs to be more aggressive. Was that a miss on his part, or was it actually more of a scheme thing where they couldn't do it? They didn't have the brain power on defense to get it done.
I think that Kevin O'Connell tried to get Donatel to change, and I think that sometimes in some parts of games he would. Like against Indianapolis, they were really aggressive in the second half of that game, but it was really only because there was nothing to lose. Anytime it was a close game, he completely backed off. And I think that they had just enough kind of like salvaging performances for him to not pull the trigger and just fire at Donatel, but probably should have. And you know what? There's another part of it too, and I don't know that this played into it. And I've maybe like floated this to a few people who don't agree with it, so I'm not saying there's something really to it, but if you make a firing like that, you have to tell who. You have to tell ownership. And if you
Mhm.
tell ownership, I want to fire the defensive coordinator in the middle of the season, isn't that what people didn't like about Mike Zimmer? Is that he
Right.
kept doing that,
Yeah.
so, firing coordinators and coaches and stuff and having the changes. So I did wonder if there was some lingering kind of impact of like the last guy would do this, so I can't really do this, or if he just believed that he would turn it around. I think with Ed Donatel, it was really that the cover band is not as good as the real band. That Vic Fangio is the real deal. He's the Beatles, and the Ed Donatel is the cover band who dresses up like the Beatles and plays your little local festival. And it's just not the same. So anyway, but let's. I want to ask this though. It's something that I asked a bunch of fans when I talked to them for this story. Was did it change what you think of the situation with Kirk? Not the view of him, because I think it did. I think it did change. One fan said, "Look, I mean, I've been as critical as anybody about not winning, but if you are just hating on him as a guy, you're just going to hate on anything no matter what." And so I think it did have an impact in how he's viewed overall. But
Yeah.
does it impact how we think the future is going to go now that we've seen more behind the scenes, or how we think it should go?
I hope it doesn't, and here's why. I'm a proponent of moving on from Kirk Cousins, either before the November trade deadline this year or after the season, right? Like if you can trade him, great. That only happens obviously if you're melting down and you're out of contention. But um, I think they have to move on, and here's why. I liken Kirk Cousins to actually this is kind of romantic, but the Minnesota Twins pitching staff this year, right? If you want to talk about baseball, the Twins have one of the best ERAs in the majors. They've got some starting pitchers like Pablo Lopez and Joe Ryan and Sonny Gray who are pretty good. But deep down, I know that when Pablo Lopez, Joe Ryan, or Sonny Gray are going to be facing the Astros or the Yankees in the playoffs, they're going to get melted down. They're going to struggle. They're not there are very few guys in sports who can take you over the top. And if the Vikings want to get over the top, I think Kirk Cousins is more like a Sonny Gray or a Joe Ryan or a Pablo Lopez than he is a Garrett Cole or a Randy Johnson or a Kurt Schilling or Pedro Martinez, right? Patrick Mahomes is Pedro Martinez. You need a Roger Clemens, right? Who's a Roger Clemens? There's what, 5 or 6 of them in the NFL right now that you can legitimately say, and Justin Jefferson probably had all 5 of them on his top 5 quarterbacks list, right? I mean, there's not many out there. So yeah, I definitely, the show changed my opinion, or at least it changed my view of who Kirk Cousins is all around. Already knew that he was a great guy. I didn't know he was this appealing on all different levels. I didn't know his abs were quite that ripped. There's a lot of stuff that I learned and I like about him, but it doesn't change my opinion about what he's going to do on the big stage until he proves
And I
otherwise.
al- and I also think that there's another interpretation of the toughness that says like this guy just got tenderized. Like he just got I mean, he just got beaten down
Well,
this year.
right? Do you want to sign a guy who you just watched on TV get obliterated week in and week out and barely walk up to read the Bible book to his little boy after a game? He could barely walk up the stairs because his ribs are bleeding or bleeding around his ribs. I don't know what's going on in there. It's brutal though, right? Like he's 35 years old. It's not going to be sore. It's going to be injured eventually. You can only be durable for so long, and maybe he's father time and he can handle it. But I don't know. I would not risk signing him to anything beyond this year. I just wouldn't do it.
Yeah, and it really speaks to, we've seen this a number of times with quarterbacks that they get to the mid 30s and then they do have that fall off. And some of them keep playing badly, like Eli Manning, who just kept playing in his mid 30s. But I mean, Matt Ryan at 35 years old, I think was 4-12. I mean, the start hit, and Matt Ryan is a much superior athlete to Kirk Cousins, but sort of in that same range of not the best quarterback in the league. And
Yeah.
that was when he started to drift off, and he's still like 6'4" and 230 and much more built than Cousins is. I think it's just the forces of nature when you get hit that much. And I do wonder about this season where those things do add up. And it's not like you just get an off season, it all heals up and you're exactly 100%. It's kind of like my back injury in a way where I heard this actually during COVID at some point, and every once in a while it just continues to come up. And I think that will happen over the years, as anyone does have it happen, except for the absolute freaks of the Breeze and the Rogers and so forth that last deep into their 30s and 40s. So it's not a good bet. I mean, even if you like what you saw, and even if you think, well, these two can win together eventually, look at where the roster is, look at what the price tag is, look at what he wanted multiple years from his side to be extended. I don't think it changes any of the realities, even if people, even if the whole world is saying, wow, whole new respect for this guy and how much he puts in. But I think that it also does leave a little pang of fear for the next quarterback, because I think what everybody realizes is if the next guy isn't willing to do all these same things as Kirk Cousins, even if he is more physically gifted, then it really shows you there's probably 15 people who are walking around Roger Goodell's green grass who can
Yeah.
actually put themselves through this stuff and have the talent to play and the leadership and the understanding of football and everything else and the accuracy and all that stuff. And so you go, oh man, if there's only like 15 guys, like we're going to draft one, is that really the silver bullet? But I think
Yeah.
that we're at a point where, regardless of how much you enjoyed that, and as an NFL films junkie, it's like right up my alley. It's everything that I want
Mhm.
in a show. But I think you could still sort of pull yourself back despite the football high and say, yeah, but I still think there's some realities to this thing that they can't overcome unless they draft someone.
Here's what I'd be worried about. If you really sit back and take a 30,000-foot view of this whole situation. You brought it up earlier. How much say does ownership have when it comes to these decisions, right? Are Ziggy and Mark Wilf hands off and they're like, "Hey, Kwesi, just do what you think is best for this team," or do they see these 8 episodes and Kirk Cousins' markability skyrocketing? I mean, let's think about this. The last 12 months of Kirk Cousins, the markability has gone through the roof. You had the Kirko chains thing. You had the NFL Honors show where they put the 17 chains on him, and they highlighted it all in the Netflix episode as well. And now you get these 8 episodes that make him as endearing as anyone in the game, right? Like people are newfound respect for this guy. They might look at him in a different light and say, okay, we do have ourselves a top 10 quarterback. Just watch him. He'll inch up all these rankings, right? But is that enough, or is that going to be the influencer for ownership to say we got to give this guy 3 more years, even if it means it's not our best shot to win a Super Bowl? Um, that's dangerous. And here's the other part too. Fans are going to look at him and now say, well, we can't get rid of Kirk. He's our best shot to win a Super Bowl, because that is the reality right now. He's our best shot to win a Super Bowl. But what's going to happen, right? You're not going to get there. Maybe you won't get there. And now you sacrificed 2 or 3 more years of the Kwesi KOC regime, and they still won't have had their say on how things work. And I know you've written extensively about that, and it's decision time for them to go with a new quarterback or hitch their wagon to Kirk. Now, it feels like because of the marketability that they might be forced to hitch their wagon to Kirk long term. I think that's a truly dangerous scenario that we're all facing here in the very near future.
You know what that sounds like? That sounds like a trolley bring me the news article
Like
that
anti-writing,
you,
yeah,
yeah, that you asked me to write, and I'm like, nah, I ain't writing that. But
yeah. You
you
never play
know,
ball. What's the deal?
there there has been a handful of fans who have asked me that question, like, are the Wilfs going to watch this thing and like Kirk so much that they like demand he's extended? And my initial reaction was like, come on, no. And then I watched it and I was like, okay, I don't know, maybe. I don't
Oh,
want, I don't,
it's real. Yeah, I think it's very real.
I don't want to
You're
completely
a
count
business
it out,
owner.
but
You're a business owner. I mean, it's you have a little more integrity maybe, but it's about the bottom line. The Wilfs are in the business of making money. They were printing bills before they were building US Bank Stadium, right? I mean, that's what they do. They're real estate icons, moguls. This is what they do. They see the marketability and they're like, "Oh my god. Shirts nowadays are going for $35 with a Nike logo on them. Let's get those chains on Kirk's neck and print them." It's crazy. They know they'll still sell out that stadium. They know that they'll go to the playoffs. They know that they're making money. It's dangerous.
Well, I do. Yeah, I do think, and it's hard to say. Like, I don't have their text messages to Kwesi adofo-mensah, but I do think that when Kwesi and Kevin O'Connell arrived, if we're putting together all the pieces of the puzzle, what we've seen now that we know in hindsight is
Mhm.
that this was the agreed upon direction. And I think that you would be doing a massive disservice to your new GM and coach if you don't give them any shots at their own quarterback, especially with the advantage that they have to have figured out by now of the salary cap with a rookie quarterback contract. Plus, Kevin O'Connell mentioned, I don't know, a bunch of times last year to us at the combine and then in a couple other press conferences, how he really likes looking at all the quarterbacks in the draft. And you just can see him like foaming at the mouth a little, like, give me my shot to draft one. And they've kind of made their bet on not drafting Kenny Pickett or Will Levis. Like, they're kind of betting on Kevin O'Connell's ability and his staff to identify who that guy is. But there is always if you win too many games, then you're going to end up kind of out of that discussion. But I think Mahomes is evidence that you can get up there if you want to. I mean, I think that Kansas City was drafting like 27th or something and traded all the way up to 10. If you really want somebody, you could probably find a way. So anyway, those who haven't watched it, I would highly suggest it. Or at bringmethenews.com, you guys have done a lot of the sort of must watch things if you're not a Netflix subscriber. If you're giving all of your money to Purple Insider Substack, which I think you could do,
You
then
should.
you rather not sign up for Netflix for one thing, then you could definitely see recaps from what you guys wrote. But fun to get together with you, Joe. I appreciate it. It's a really fun conversation. Thanks for coming on, man.
Yeah, thanks, dude. We'll see you on the golf course.
Ah, yes, yes. I've been working at it and I'm still bad. Bringmethenews.com, though, is where you can find all Minnesota news and sports. All right. Thanks. We'll talk again soon.